Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
Hey everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with another stakes preview. Obviously, Kentucky Derby Day means the Kentucky Derby, but it also means plenty of stakes races, especially graded stakes. We're going to take a look at one of them, race number 7 this Saturday. The Grade 2 Turf Sprint, 5.5 furlongs at Churchill Downs on their turf course. We'll take a look at this field top to bottom. It's a pretty big field. See 14 entered, some of the bigger names in here. Big Invasion, who's been extremely impressive throughout his career. Arrest Me Red, who's a hard-knocking, older kind of war horse type. Notorious is a horse that comes in here off a really big performance out in California. Karatari, a lot of quick horses here. A lot of horses are going to be, trying to close from off a really quick pace. We'll start with the number 1 in here. Nobles for Larry Ravelli was 9th in his most recent outing at Keeneland. Prior to that, was 2nd at Turfway Park while going 3/4 of a mile on the synthetic. And it's been a while since he won, but really last year he was 4 for 6, had some really big performances. I think he benefits here from the inside draw. I do think there, a couple other horses in here are a tad quicker than him, and his recent form leaves me with something to be desired. He's 20-1 on the morning line. And the number 2, Go Bears Go, is a new addition to the barn of Wesley Ward. Prior to that, you can see was out at Keeneland for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, but prior to that was out in Europe, making a bunch of starts over there, had some really nice performances, such as a win in the Phoenix Sprint. And even go down the page, had a really nice performance at Ascot. So most recently, his lone start in 2022 that was stateside was a 12th place finish in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Now in the barn of Wesley Ward, who has had no problems with turf sprinters throughout his career. You see Johnny Velasquez has the call. The number 3, Evan Singh, it's one of the Al Stall barn, who was a winner last time out in a small stake at Fairgrounds, but worth noting the meet there with the turf course, the rail was out further. So you kind of think of it in terms of distance. Do you really go 5.5? I don't think so, just because the rail was further out, and raced very well in that effort. Prior to that, he had 2, not great performances at Kentucky Downs and Keeneland. Keeneland was all right, though, in that allowance race, but it was nice to see him start his year with a nice win as a 4-year-old. The number 4, Big Invasion, I mentioned when we looked at the slate for the field. He's been extremely impressive. He's 7 for 9 in his career. He's a 4-year-old son of Declaration of War. And we're going to take a look at his most recent performance in the $100,000 Silks Run at Gulfstream Park. Now, it's his first race since early September at Kentucky Downs. And just pointing out a couple horses in here, he's the 9, the number 2. Is Karatari, who's always been a very fast horse. But Big Invasion gets to the outside in here and is really able to run down a very quick horse by the name of Yes I Am Free, who's has a very impressive record in South Florida. And this just seems like a nice race from Big Invasion to kind of gear him up for this Grade 2 competition. And I know he's only had a couple of cracks at the graded stakes level, but he does have that 100 buyer speed figure in the Grade 3 quick call. And I think the pace will be right for him. I think he'll be close enough to really make a nice, impactful late move in the stretch. The number 5, Necker Island. He's only got 2 turf starts under his belt, the best one being a 3rd place finish. And you look at his last couple efforts, he's done a lot of different things. He's raced at a mile and a 16th in the Essex. He tried the Oaklawn Mile, and more recently tried a 3/4 of a mile event at Oaklawn. And maybe it was a tactic by trainer Chris Hartman to just start cutting him back gradually in distance a little bit. And they're going to try something new. He hasn't worked out since he just did race on April 15th. But the turf record leaves something to be desired from a limited number of starts. The number 6, Bad Beat Brian. And he's been aptly named. There's been a lot of performances where he's rounded out the exotics or been pretty close to winning and hasn't been able to get the job done. Actually, going to look at a race that really shows that it was last time out at Keeneland in the Grade 2 Shakertown. Looking at him in this field, he's the number 9. The 12 is Arrest Me Red, and the 10 is Oceanic. Now, the race ends up being won by Caravel, who's been so impressive in her career. And Bad Beat Brian, though, is going to try to put some pressure on her late in the stretch here on her outside, and it looks like Bad Beat Brian is going to go by, but Caravel is very gritty in the stretch here and is able to get the job done by a very slim head. You can see Arrest Me Red, as I mentioned, ends up kind of closing out there, as well as Oceanic. And for him, that's an equal best career buyer of a 99. I thought it was a really great effort from him. Prior to that, I'm willing to actually excuse his efforts at Turfway Park, even though it's a synthetic surface and you think the form should transfer. It doesn't mean that it always does, and I think he's much better on the turf. So he's coming into this race off a really big effort. He's 15-1 on the morning line. Maybe a horse that could score a bit of an upset in the exotics. The number 7, Nothing Better, was a winner last time out at Aqueduct, going 3/4 of a mile. You go down the page, they've tried him at a slew of distances, primarily though at these sprint distances, but he actually was pretty competitive at a mile in the Red Bank. He's very quick. He's been able to rattle off sub 44 opening half miles, which I think in a 5.5 furlong race at Churchill. He should be forwardly placed in here. I think he is going to take some pressure from some other horses in here that are equally as quick, but Nothing Better expected to be part of that pace scenario. The number 8, Just Might, an outsider in here at 20-1, was third in his most recent outing at Keeneland in an allowance event. You go down the page, he's tried the turf sprint last year. He was 7th after being part of a pace in there that wasn't all too quick in terms of when you look at some of his other efforts. It just was a race that I think he has been forwardly placed and was maybe a little bit quicker at an earlier age. But last time out, he did set off some pretty big fractions at Keeneland that were faster than what we saw from him last year and just could not sustain his bid. He hasn't fared the best in his last couple efforts at this stakes level. The number 9, Oceanic, this was one that we saw was closing pretty hard and just missed third behind Arrest Me Red in the Shakertown. Prior to that, tried the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and more recently, he actually raced very well at Keeneland in the Woodford. He was a big price in there at 13-1. He got 100 Buyer speed figure for finishing second behind Golden Pal. He's a horse that he's consistently getting those minor checks. He's not necessarily winning a ton of races. He's just 4 for 21 in his career, but he's been able to carve nice trips from off the pace. And probably, 2 or 3 of his last 4 efforts. The 10, Arrest Me Red. We saw the video where it was basically him and Oceanic in a photo. 4:30, ended up getting third. He's a 5-year-old who he's made a significant amount of money in his career, $850,000. He's got 6 wins. Earlier in his career, is a bit more forwardly placed. Now they've had that ability to maybe just have him just off the pace. I thought he ran very well in the Shakertown. It was certainly a step up from his prior 2 efforts, and we didn't see him a ton in 2022. This is something that's a little common for Wesley Ward. He has these turf sprinters, and he really picks and chooses their spots. I think he's very live in this spot to step up second off the layoff. The number 11, Notorious, this horse coming out of California. We'll take a look at his most recent effort. He was a really nice winner out at Santa Anita, going 6.5 furlongs on the downhill. We just saw him cross over the dirt, now back on the turf. He's the number 5. Yes, he was favored in here, and he won like he should. But it took him a little bit to get going. You can see his head was up for a second. And he's going to gear down here in the late stages, and no one else is really making a move at this point. It's all Notorious in the stretch. Flavien Prat has been aboard him for all of his wins since coming over from overseas. The question I have with him is the distance. His last 3 efforts, he's come from off the pace. Yes, he was the closest that he's been to those early fractions in his most recent outing, but they've all been at 6.5. And I just wonder, is 5.5 a little short for him? That's always a question. It doesn't seem like it's a lot of distance, but in these turf sprints, a furlong can mean a lot. The number 12, Karatari, we saw was third in the Silks run behind Big Invasion, who will face once again. I was really impressed with this horse back in 2021. He's 7 now. He's still very competitive. I just think in terms of his quickness, I'm not sure if he's just run into quicker horses or if he's just not as quick as he once was. It's really tough to say, but he's been a very consistent type. You can see 2 starts this year, 2 in the money finishes, still looking for his first win since September of 2022, which happened at Plimlico. Luis Saez, though, knows him very well, and 2 of his last 3 wins were with Luis Saez, so just something to note there. He is, though, 0 for 6 at Churchill. 13, Artemis City Limits was 11th in the Shakertown at odds of 4-1. He took a lot of respect in there. Prior to that, they saw him in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, where he finished 5th at huge odds. He was only beaten by 2.5 lengths behind Caravel. He's a horse that was really, really strong in 2022. He was 2 for 10, but he had a lot of in-the-money finishes. He is very quick when he wants to be. I still think maybe a couple in here are quicker than him, but he's going to need to step up. I think there is room to, kind of excuse his most recent effort. It was just his first start off the layoff, and he might have needed a race to kind of get him back up to speed. Then rounding out the fields, the number 14, Noble Reflection. This one is also a California shipper who's won his last two efforts, one at 6 furlongs, one at 6.5. He's been able to go to the front and say goodbye from the gate. He's coming into this race off a career best effort with 100 buyer speed figure. He's a 2.5 length winner. He has actually tried stakes competition in the past, but they were on the dirt in very different circumstances. In this race being a 5.5 furlong turf sprint. So that is the field of 14. Looked at a couple replays. We talked about a lot of horses that are maybe consistent for underneath, but a horse that's been very consistent on top is the number 4 Big Invasion, and that's who I ended up going as my top selection. I mentioned his record. He's 7 for 9. I think he's going to get enough pace in here. He's going to be able to make his late run, and I think he's just, kind of set to improve in his second start of 2023. I also look at the number 10 at Arrest Me Red, who I thought was really, pretty impressive to round out the trifecta in the Grade 2 Shaker Town. Been a consistent type throughout his career. He does have a win at Churchill. The 11 Notorious. I mentioned I am concerned about the distance. I think he's going to potentially have too much work to do late in terms of winning, but I think he can get a piece in here. And then finally, I was torn between the 6 Bad Beat Brian and the 3 Evan Singh. And I just thought Evan Singh was a horse worth looking at in terms of his, efforts at 5.5 furlongs. They've been really strong. He comes in this race off a career best effort and a win, and just curious to see him, outside of Fairgrounds with the situation that they had with their turf course. I think he's maybe intriguing at Churchill this Saturday. But for me, the number 4 Big Invasion ends up being my top pick.